Hi, friend. Welcome to episode 7. This one is awesome because I have a special guest. Ryan Martin, he's a storytelling expert, and for the next hour, you're going to listen to us banter, laugh, make inappropriate statements, and also have a lot of fun with storytelling. Enjoy.
You're here because you want more engagement, more delight, more fun, more learning. You're hungry for change and willing to take action.
If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original.
Welcome to the eLearning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Let's take learning to the next level.
And today I have a special treat for you. I have a guest in my office studio. It's Ryan Martin. And Ryan is an e-learning developer. He's a designer. And his home base is elearnerengaged.com. And I'm going to, basically, you can say hi now.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be here.
Cool. I'm going to ask you questions about the work you do, and I think you have a really unique perspective on the e-learning industry, the way e-learning is designed. And I know my angle comes in from scenario design, but I think you'll have, I'll let you talk about it yourself because I think it's kind of, I'm not going to talk
Ramble.
for you. I'm not going to ramble for you. All right, with that introduction, and I'm going to have some tea in the background here. Could you tell us a little bit about, or a lot about, your vision for e-learning?
My vision for e-learning. That's
no pressure.
No pressure here at all. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about my vision, or at least the thinking that I do about e-learning, and I won't even say it's in e-learning in general. It's like what's going on online and how people are engaging with the internet. Because a lot of my inspiration, I'm sure a lot of the listeners' inspiration, is seeing or at least interacting with applications that have nothing to do with e-learning, and they're being engaged with these applications. And I think and a lot of people naturally are drawing inspiration from all of these cool tools that are popping up all over the place every single year that are forcing us to engage with them. So they're doing something right. And there's obviously that element, but then there's the element that we forgot. Now that I'm going to start heading down my rabbit hole here. Basically, the other element we forgot about is how we make people feel. Not about just the dopamine hit that you get from a Facebook like or a comment or all these other pings that happen and all this kind of Las Vegas style gambling type dopamine hits that are now being engineered into internet applications like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So those are things that I'm aware of and I think are cool, but the thing that's lost on those is the human element and real emotional feelings. And you get that from storytelling, and you get that by actually having empathy for people. So it's a combination, like my vision for e-learning, to sum this up, is, okay, we got some cool tools that obviously you can engage people and almost get them to interact. That's great. But these are people, right? And that's something I'm exploring a lot more with my work. And I hate saying research because it's not research for me.
Yeah, just say it's research because I've seen your research. You dig in. You are one of those people who really loves to explore why things make sense.
Yeah, I love it. So and I'm trying to understand it because it works for me. Works for me, and when I say what's working for me, I'm really thinking about storytelling. I understand Facebook, I understand Instagram, what Twitter, and all these, and Snapchat. I know what's going on there, but that's so shallow. Let's be honest. It's so shallow. If you look what the majority of people are having conversations about, or even how they're reacting to these tools, it's like nothing. Now, you sit down and you listen to a story and like think about a story that inspires you or motivates you or gets you to think about your life in a certain way and actually now sends you on a different direction. We know that happens all the time, and we know that's real. Whether it's a story from your uncle, from your grandfather, from your grandmother, those types of stories, or a story that's a folk tale that we're completely forgetting about now. Like that's stuff that I'm thinking about. How can you integrate that into e-learning? Those types of feelings, and I'm not talking about. Like obviously you have the actual training material, you have the content, I get that, but how can you integrate the types of emotional feelings that could send people down a training program that actually might change their life, like and using the tools of storytelling?
See, it's kind of neat when you when I knew I'd be talking to you today, I started thinking about maybe a good analogy of maybe even my own personal experiences with story that I feel have almost like enhanced my life. And I remember going to this is what came up. I remember going to Europe, and I went to the Louvre, and I went to this art gallery that was the Van Gogh one. And I thought back to those experiences, and to me, when we went to the Van Gogh art gallery, what happened is you experienced all of those separate art pieces, but it was through the narrative of one person's life. And I felt that just not only resonated with me, but then I could look at each piece of art in context of that person's thinking and feelings right then. It wasn't like it was a sporadic mix of random pieces and you're like, this is all Van Gogh. You followed the process of his exploration of art, all those things, through his story. Exactly. And that was insanely awesome. And it's I still remember it vividly, certain pieces because I've been walked through. And then I compare that to my experience at the Louvre, which is to me basically that transactional type of educational experience that we have, which is here's everything out of context. Yes. Remember it. Like the only thing I remember from the Louvre, other than overwhelm, was the Mona Lisa, and it's probably because all the stories and all those things that I learned about Michelangelo and the Mona Lisa and the mystery behind the Mona Lisa that actually made me remember that.
That's
if you ask me, or Da Vinci, oh my goodness. So all those. All that, it almost, those two experiences in the same space, to me, exemplify how powerful story can be, even in the context of an art experience and remembering.
Yes.
So then, but you're saying...
Well, I like what you said about context, and that makes me think about how context is lost today, and I hate saying things like this. It's like today, this is how the world works.
Well, go back to podcasts. I rant about that a bit, or quite a bit.
No, but you said about I heard there the growth of Van Gogh. You were able to see the growth of Van Gogh, right, throughout his life. Now that's giving you the context, and what's happening today is. And I think maybe this is natural or because we want to take shortcuts, but we see the finished product so much. And the context that we're given, or the lack of context we're given, is here's the finished product, now soak that in, instead of actually seeing the growth you need to go through in your life, the steps you need to go through, the struggle you need to go through, the obstacles you need to go through to actually get to that finished product. So when you go to the Louvre and you actually see the finished product, you're like, oh, that's beautiful, that's inspiring. But it's not going to really hit you as far as, say, going to another museum or something and seeing the story of someone's personal growth and where they started maybe as a teenager or what inspired them. And then you actually see all their art pieces from when they were 16, 17, 18, all the way up until maybe possibly when they were 80 and 90, because a lot of artists, at least the prolific ones, don't stop. And those are touching stories because you actually see, hey, wait a minute, wow, there's actually some work and practice involved here. Yeah. And I'm starting to really understand how life actually works. It's not just the finished product. And that's where things like, again, going back to the tech tools or what's happening today with social media, we see the finished product so much And people are completely lost on the obstacles, the struggles, the stories that actually take you to those finished products. Products being like, say, people's success or what they're achieving, right? You know, we have some great people, like admire people like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. I always think about, like, wow, wouldn't it be great to do an e-learning course where the end of the e-learning course is you have made the decisions that the same decisions Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk made to become who they are to a certain extent. Like, give them maybe 6 to 9 scenario questions that are difficult Elon Musk, Steve Jobs type decisions, right? Big time business decisions, big time life decisions.
Big consequences.
Consequences in life that it would send you down either a direction where it took them, or it would just send you down a life of, you know, an average life. That
Wait, are you pitching a project right now on this podcast?
No,
If
no.
somebody's out there who wants to run and put together,
Well, this is kind of like in the same. Well, actually, this is in the same line of something we talk about is finding your top performer in your workplace.
Yeah.
Finding your top performer in your workplace, but not just give. Kind of tell people exactly what that person is doing now. You actually have to share the context of what made that top performer. Take them through the obstacles and the scenarios and situations that actually make you a top performer. And you can do that in e-learning. You can go back and take them in a, say, a 15 to 20 minute e-learning experience. You can take people through that journey and give people the context of, like, yeah, if you made these decisions, you're going to be heading down a path that will take you to becoming a top performer. That might actually, like I said, if we actually get the stories of an Elon Musk and go back and you actually were able to pull his stories out, get his conflicts, get his situations and scenarios, the decisions he needed to make, and put that in an e-learning course, I think that'd be cool, because then you could finish the e-learning course and you actually get a score. You're like, you rate 0 as far as Elon Musk is concerned.
I'd be up there.
And that's why you are where you are right now.
Oh, that's
Well, that's how blunt I would be. But no, I would give them the opportunity to try again. I would say, try again.
Okay, so it sounds like you're into tough love with your learner.
I would make it witty. I would make it funny. I would make it funny.
Okay, so
I would have sad trombone.
Oh, God. So, by the way, if you actually Googled sad trombone, there is a website dedicated to just that one sound. Just as a side note. Okay, so why... Okay, if story is so powerful and story is so, as far as I'm concerned, inherent in the way we've passed on important lessons, why are we seeing so little of it and maybe done so poorly in the world of education today? And I'm specifically talking about scenarios or e-learning.
I could probably answer that. I think about this because from what I've learned is storytelling is insanely simple, and we've gotten away from it so much that now we're looking at it and going, oh, it's difficult, because you look at we've now left it in the realm of prolific writers, whether it's J.K. Rowling, and we're like, oh, what she's doing is magical, or that guy who writes the Game of Thrones. You're like, oh, that's a storyteller. I can never do that. Or Hollywood, and you look at movies and you're like, well, that's storytelling. I can never do that. But really, the majority of books and the majority of stories out there aren't, they're not good. But the ones that are good are following a very basic formula that we could bring into e-learning. Mm-hmm. And I think what's happened is we don't have jobs of storyteller anymore. There's not many, and they're only left to, like I said, people who write books or plays, and it's a small little segment. But it is such a powerful tool, especially for education, that we should start really understanding it and understand how simple it is. And when I say simple, it's really 3 things. It's character, desire, and conflict. And I'm stealing that from Michael Haig, actually, who's a screenwriter. He's basically broken it down. I think he's storymastery.com if you want to learn more about that.
Okay,
It's a lot to unpack.
It's no, that's not it. Actually, what I'm thinking is that I don't think story's that easy, and I think a lot of people that do this stuff, I don't think they think story's easy. So what do you mean by when you say story's easy? What do you mean by that? Because I think a lot of people out there be like, I'm not a good storyteller. I recognize a great story when I see one, but I don't actually know what makes it really good.
Okay, so let's challenge ourselves here then. Let's just write a story right now that we haven't even planned for, and see if this either
in front of a live studio audience.
Let's see, because like I said, we just said that story. Now let's take your basic. Okay, let's go back and go. We're talking about e-learning here.
Yes.
So e-learning is essentially boring. Most of it, let's be honest, or it lacks a human element. It's basically.
I'll give you that one.
It's here's some information, here's some content, soak it in. As far as like you're a computer, like treating people like a computer. Soak this in, remember it. Put it into your computer in your head. That's that, right? Mm-hmm. Now that's not how people work. It's like we're kidding ourselves, thinking because there has to be a certain feeling to that information. There actually has to be a desire for why that's important, or your brain will just say this is not important and forget about it.
So
we just don't care.
You're saying take it to the level of like what's in it for me, as in rationalize how this engaging with this whatever it is going to help you.
Well, what I'm saying is treat the information and the content that you're trying to have people consume, treat it like how people actually consume information and content. And you actually have to put some emotion behind that. You actually have to give them a desire. Mm-hmm. There's two things. It's either that information will bring them closer to pleasure or away from pain. And if you're not making that clear to them, like let's be honest, no, they're not going to find any reason whatsoever to think that the information's important, other than I got to remember it because so I could keep my job. It's just like, that's why 70% of people are disengaged at their work, is because I think that's, I'm going to, again, I said I'm going to rant, so I'm going to rant right now. You see those stats where, what is it, like 50% of people are disengaged and then something like 30% are actively disengaged, meaning that 30% of your employees are job hunting at your workplace, looking for another job, or they're actively hurting the company in some way. Like they're so resentful now that they will hurt your company, like 30%. I think that's from like one of those Gallup polls or whatever.
That's scary.
Yeah, it's scary. But that's where it's like, well, what's the training department doing? Like, what's not human resource, but what's the training department doing? Well, let's start putting some, a human element behind the content and material you're putting out there. Like, give people a reason why what they do on the job and the stuff they're learning and what they're applying, there's a human element behind it. And that's what I mean by storytelling now.
Yeah.
And now let's get back to storytelling.
Okay, so when you say human element, you mean story. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean story, because if you look at storytelling, if you look at any movie, Pride and Prejudice, what's that about? It's about love, right?
Yeah. A lot. yeah. So that's what I mean. It's like it's about a human emotion that you could sit down. You're like, okay, that was from 200 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's completely out of context for me. But why am I engaged with this? It's because I have an emotional attachment to it, and that's what I mean by the training. Like when we say 70% of people are disengaged at work, well, they're just not emotionally attached to what they're doing. Yeah, that's true.
And you can't just go, well, that's on them. Well, are we actively trying to make them emotionally attached to what they're doing? And I think that's on us to give them that reason. I'm fine with saying let's implant that desire, implant, implant the purpose that is on a human understanding.
It's kind of interesting right now what you said, because I always think about the the environment that that person is in being conducive to helping them learn. And to me, that's not just the external environment, right? But it's also what's happening in your head that makes you ready to learn something. And so a lot of times when we design learning, we're assuming somebody's an open book.
Yes.
And they're like, we actually assume that they're like us and they're reading, every day just for fun, and they're engaged with everything around them, and all they want to do is just get better and better and better. But what you're saying is that we actually have to assume that they don't care. They don't want to be there.
Yeah.
Like, we're dealing with the 70% that don't want to be there.
Okay, but that's a good point. Let's take it back to what we see in top nonfiction books, say from the authors like Malcolm Gladwell and Charles Duhigg, who wrote The Power of Habit.
Yeah.
And all those books. I think there's another one there that is that other guy who does that focus one.
I forgot his name.
Younger guy who he put out a couple good books.
Oh, the distillation of things to like the one thing.
Anyways, well, there's obviously
Just look up self-help.
Yeah. Well, it's not really self-help, but it's kind of like that. Those authors who are now bringing psychology to the masses to a large extent. Okay. Now, again, going back to what you just said, they could, like Malcolm Gladwell, since I'm just going to use him since he seemed to have started this.
I think so.
This trend, like back in 2000.
The most well-known.
Yeah. So he could have just wrote a book and said, here's the psychology research. And with the same mentality that the training departments have, and go, yeah, everyone just loves this stuff. This is just so fascinating. This is cool.
Stats.
This is great. Yeah, but no, that's not what these types of authors, Malcolm Gladwell and everyone else who is now following that path and trying to bring psychology to the masses, like Dan Ariely, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, you need stories, you need metaphors, you need like they're all full of stories. These books, like there's a reason, like. It's so blatantly obvious why they need to tell stories. Like, I think maybe...
Okay, tell us the reason why you think why they need to tell
because
those
that's
stories.
how people learn. That's how we could... Like, that's how we find... I got this from Jordan Peterson, but it's so true. That's how we find meaning in the world. That's how we find meaning in life, is through story. Like, that's it.
So... And it's kind of neat. I'm working on this project, and one of the things that's we're interviewing these experts in lost languages, and one of the things they're talking about is the one thing they're fighting for the hardest is to maintain the stories of their people, because they know that if the stories are maintained, that's going to keep their knowledge alive and the context of the language alive.
Well,
right?
I wouldn't even say it's just about that. I would say there's probably some... How old are these stories?
Oh, they're thousands of years.
Okay, there's thousands of years of like education and a way to conduct yourself in the world, probably.
They are.
Because that's exactly what stories are. Stories,
like Aesop's fables.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to steal from Jordan Peterson, but I agree with it. Stories like the Aesop fables and these fables of old, whether it's the Bible, are ways to conduct yourself in the world, and they've put like thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. And get this is something that blew my mind, is the Bible and all of these stories that were written down. Well, we only think about the time when they actually were written down, which is like a couple thousand years ago, like put on paper, right?
Yes, papyrus.
But think about those stories were probably told verbally for possibly 10,000 years.
Yes.
Or longer. And again, stories are about how to conduct yourself in life, like how to act. When I say that is how to actually have a neighbor and actually be neighborly, if that makes sense. I'm not talking about how to conduct yourself with, the global world and everything, or how to conduct yourself on social media, right?
Although you could tell a story about that if you wanted to, couldn't you?
Well, yeah, I guess you could. Yeah, that'd be interesting. Well, I don't know if it'll be interesting. For sure. But anyways, let's go back to the point of story. And I think what we're trying to say here is that stories are really how people understand how to conduct themselves in life, how to act in life, how to actually find meaning in life.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Interesting. So it's evolution of language. Who was it that was actually talking about this? This was so cool. It was, those caves in
France?
In France, exactly. And the idea behind the pictures there was that they told a story of what it takes to have a hunt, let's say, and that I forgot where it came from.
Those are like 30,000 or 50,000 years old, something like that. Yeah.
And so the reason why they say that those paintings are there depicting that hunt was to have somebody imagine in their mind already what it would be like to be in that situation. In fact, so it was combining the storytelling with a visual element that made you, almost prepared you emotionally for when the actual event happened.
Yeah,
which is such a cool concept because really, if you take this, I'm happy.
Now you're getting into where I'm thinking about e-learning, because you said something that what I think about for the purpose of e-learning, and I'm just going to say this straight up.
That's how we roll here on the Anna's
Well,
Band.
there's a new purpose for e-learning, and it's what Anna just said. You said something like, give them the emotional of what it's going to be like, the emotional understanding of what it's going to be like to do the action, right? Mm-hmm. And you can do that through storytelling, and you can do that through e-learning, not just by using storytelling as a tool to develop the e-learning, but then have them make the decisions, like I said earlier, about if these are decisions that a top performer would make. Mm-hmm. So you can actually go through the story of a top performer that's in your workplace.
Yes.
And obviously you could make this, take someone who interview that top performer, but then make it fictional, so there's an emotional attachment, like amplify that, just like all storytellers do.
Yeah.
Like, you see those... the movies about Steve Jobs that recently came out. Well, they amplify the emotional. All of them do, right? The tension and everything. That's the point of storytelling, and that's what you're able to do.
Mm-hmm. That's why I think the best documentaries that we care about are the ones where they're not entirely factual. They actually
they're edited.
Pick the right elements to give you that emotion. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of cool because what you're saying is the combination of taking the work from. Taking the inspiration from somebody's story who is a top performer, but then...
Well, they're the finished product right now. Like, they're the actual, like, where you want to get to. However, that they might not be the desire. Remember how I said that storytelling is character, desire, and conflict. Mm-hmm. Now, we have an end product that's saying it's a top performer. You want people to be like this top performer, an A player. And I'm fine with using that term A player because we know they all exist, right? Like, just people who crush it at work. And just they're great workers, right? Like, there's no denying it.
Well, Steve Jobs knew that he wanted to surround himself with A players, right? I mean,
somebody said, I learned this a long time ago, and somebody said, if you go into any workplace and you ask people who's the best employee or who's the best worker here, I think instantly right? Everybody knows who it is. Yeah.
But then the same is true for who should be like the first to go, right?
Well, usually, I never thought about it that way, but yeah, sure. But anyways, say you want people to be like this top performer, this A player, right? Okay, that's great. However, so what I was saying was, so I was saying that like you have. Going back to storytelling, and like I said, you have these three elements of character, desire, and conflict. Now, I'm not trying to say that you have an ideal in your workplace. It's your A player, right? And you want everyone to be like your A player. Now, from a storytelling element, that A player is not the desire for everyone. They're not. Like, no, you don't. People don't want to be that person, but you actually want to give them a desire to bring them forward and taking them on a journey, and the journey will have them transform into that person. So that could either, like I said before, that's either it's either getting away from pain or moving towards pleasure. And you have to actually now start talking to your employees and saying, what's important to you? What's important to you to go on that journey and pull you from where you are now? If we're going to talk about, say, a new employee, right? Okay, so you got a new employee. Now, what's the desire for that new employee? That would take them on the journey to become an A player. So that's where the fun begins as far as storytelling, because that desire might have nothing to do with your company. It might have to do with paying their mortgage off, right?
Okay, so but wouldn't you get into kind of the danger there? Like I'm thinking about me working at, let's say, my company, and wouldn't there be as many reasons as there are people for engaging with that path?
Well,
Wouldn't that be hard?
that's fine, but what you're trying to find something obviously that's fairly universal, right? That most people would agree with. Like that's a pretty, and this is where, like I said, you have to go back to what's important to people. And once you start understanding what's important to people, then you get kind of this universal area of what you're dealing with here.
So
right?
what are some universals?
Confidence, right? I think most people want to be more confident. Let's say, like to be assertive. To carry themselves in a certain way, we all admire somebody. Let's just take somebody like President Barack Obama. Like he was admired and still is admired for his public speaking and the way he just stood at the podium, right, and was able to just say a wonderful speech and just the way he projected himself.
So calm and collected.
Okay, well, let's just say, there you go. That's a universal kind of that we could all agree on. It's like, confidently standing at a podium. Now, not using him as the example anymore, but just the idea of that.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that's one. Let's throw that on the whiteboard as far as a desire that maybe our employees would want to have, is just being confident in the workplace, being admired at the workplace. I think Tony Robbins was talking about as one of the, and I think this is even on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's status, right? So you got something that everyone wants to increase their status in some way. So what is that? Like, start exploring that. Go on the whiteboard, start brainstorming some things as far as status is concerned that people would, inspire them to go on your e-learning journey to become the top performer.
Yeah.
Again, because you don't want to say the end desire is you're going to become Jim, the top performer. Nobody cares about that.
Yeah.
But what are the universal elements that we as a society has put up on a high pedestal as far as that's a good way of acting, that's a good way of being, or that will take you away from your pain, because everyone's dealing with pain in a certain way, right? So you could, and that's where all stories. Let's go, and what I mean by that is think of a Pixar movie. The first 10% of a Pixar movie is amplifying a certain pain, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the first Incredibles, you have, that's the pain is the family at that point. I think it's Mr. Incredible's job. He's no longer a superhero. His family's pretty mundane, and
I think part of it there is that they're
bored.
They're bored.
Yeah, they're bored.
And they're not living, like we all see they're not living to their full potential.
There you go. Yeah, so that was very simple. Like that like for us just to do this on the spot and going, hey, how about boredom and the idea of not reaching your full potential? So that would be a good beginning even of an e-learning course to go, let's admit people are generally bored and people don't like boredom. People do not like being bored. I think it's like the number one thing. No, it is from a persuasion. I read a book. It's called like the 1 minute, the 1 sentence persuasion book or something. I forget who wrote it, but he's been researching persuasion for the longest time, and he's saying that. Well, he said that you can't persuade people who are bored. So right now, if your listeners are bored by our conversation right now, I'm not going to persuade them at all about storytelling. That's kind of my point. But if they are engaged, if they actually do find this conversation interesting, I might actually persuade them more that storytelling is actually worth it. you know? And
So because I wanted to get to some practical.
I don't know if that's anything about what we were just talking about, but I thought I'd go off on that tangent.
It's okay. So I'm thinking I want to get a little bit more practical and also get to the other two pieces that you were talking about, which is character and what was the third piece? Character. Conflict. Okay, so tell us more. How do I figure out what character to use? Does it matter?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
No.
Man, woman, child.
No.
As long as what? I'm assuming that
the character represents. Don't forget when we go in and watch a movie or read a book, you're the character. Mm-hmm. You immediately become that character, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Like that character's emotions and their journey, you're on that journey. Those are your emotions. That's why you cry at movie theaters. That's why you get scared if you watch Aliens,
Blair Witch,
or the Blair Witch Project. Why are you scared? Like, have you ever, like, maybe, like, this is a great question for the audience right now. It's just like, think about the last movie you saw that you actually cried during, or you got really scared, like, and then start going, why was I crying? Like, why was I scared? Like, really ask yourself, why were you crying and why were you scared? Well, the reason being is because you are now that main character. You're having the same emotions. And that's actually what's super awesome about that is that's called state control. It's like, that's again something Tony Robbins talks about is that movie, that story got you in a certain state. They got you in a certain state where you identified with that main character at the beginning. You identified and you became that person because you actually identified with their emotions and who that person was. You identified, right?
Okay.
So when something actually in the conflict started happening and the emotional scenarios of that journey happened, well, you felt that. That movie's now controlled your state. That story controlled your state. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a reason why you got scared. There's a reason why you started crying, is because that movie and that story controlled your state, which is insanely powerful. And that's also something that e-learning can do. You can control your employee's state. And that's not just about controlling their state, about making them cry. You don't want to do that. No, but I mean, controlling their state to inspire them at the end. Mm. So when they actually finish that e-learning at the end, say even if it's 15 minutes, they're all of a sudden going, oh, wait a minute, I can overcome my obstacles because they've just gone through the same emotional journey and you've attached them to a certain character, like they've actually identified with a certain character. Mm-hmm. And now, when I say they have identified with a certain character, they've become that character. So they've gone on the journey. Mm-hmm. Then at the end, you've taken them to a place where emotionally, they've already conquered all their obstacles. Mm-hmm. Emotionally, they're ready. And I think that's something you brought up earlier. And I don't know if you were aware of that, you brought it up. And it's exactly what I agree with, is that at the end of the story, they've emotionally overcome their obstacles, whether it's leadership skills, whether it's sales skills, whether it's being assertive so they don't get harassed at the workplace. Because I think that's something that I don't want to get onto a tangent about this, but we can create more. This goes for everyone, man, woman, doesn't matter who you are. We can all be more confident, right? Mm-hmm. And if you have an e-learning project that actually boosts people's confidence, makes them, and I'm fine using the word assertive, it's not a negative word, but it just allows them to just be more empowered as a person so they could actually conduct themselves, and we all can conduct ourselves in a very straightforward manner. That's not, I don't mean that in a way that we're not friendly or whatever, but we're just like,
honest.
Well, honest and truthful. Yeah, that's actually would be the way I would want to go, is that we could start speaking the truth as far as the way we conduct ourselves in the workplace. And that's an emotional journey. Don't forget, because a lot of us, and even myself included, obviously I'm comfortable talking about this topic because it's something I think about, but there's obviously places in my life where I'm not too assertive or confident in because I'm out of my element, right? Mm-hmm. But that's where e-learning or a story might actually boost my confidence and actually take me, I'll watch a movie like, I don't know, Gladiator or something like that. And now I feel, men do this all the time. They'll watch Rocky
right? Why do they watch Rocky or play the Rocky soundtrack before a workout? It's a great question.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the point is I'm trying to make is like e-learning can be a powerful tool if you actually layer on storytelling and taking them on an emotional journey where they are now a superhero leader or a superhero sales associate or a superhero just person who's conducting themselves in the workplace the way you want them to conduct themselves, and they actually feel that.
That just reminded me because when we went to that Tony Robbins event. And it's crazy how he knows how much you need to be primed to be ready for his message. Even if you know you've spent the money, he still will amp up the music to get you in this.
Yeah.
He'll get you to stand up, get out of your seats like you are. But before he even comes out on stage, he's already stacking all these things in place to make sure you're ready for what he's going to say. Because if we all were just sitting down waiting for Tony to come out and clapping, it wouldn't be as powerful.
Yeah,
right?
and what he's doing is state control.
Exactly.
He's basically taking control of your physiology.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's basically your physiology will control what's going on in your head.
Totally.
That's a fact. Like,
oh yeah. I mean, I've for years I first got turned on to this, even the idea of, the room that you're in, the color of the room that you're in, the are you hungry? All those things affect you, but you can actually influence people through the messages and the language that you use to forget about their hunger, forget about where they are, and actually put them in influence their mental state to prime it for learning.
I think it's fair to actually, I've never seen this in an e-learning course.
Here's the challenge.
Yeah, here's a challenge. Here's a great idea for everyone. You know how you begin an e-learning course, and if you are an e-learning designer, you know what I'm talking about, is that you have these instructions at the beginning. Now, most of the instructions are very horrible, meaning that they're basically trying to explain to you the user interface, and the reason they need to explain the user interface is because it's so bad.
Have you ever picked up an iPad and it's like, by the way, here's how? Nobody explains an iPad to you. They just give it to you.
Yeah, but right? the more important thing that has to do with what we were just talking about is, imagine if the instructions were, okay, sit up straight. Like literally, you just said on the screen, sit up straight, because most people are slouching at their computer.
Yeah.
Their head's all down, their back is all crooked or hunched over. You know how people are. They just start.
Well, yeah, but they're like, it's another thing.
Yeah, you like imagine the person who's sitting. Watch The Incredibles in the first 10 minutes and picture Mr. Incredible. Even though it's Mr. Incredible and he's all huge and muscly, but he's all slouched over, beaten down at his desk, right? Now your e-learning course, let's just put some instructions at the beginning and say, sit up straight.
Yeah.
Shoulders
back.
Try to control their physiology or bit, or
Smile.
even include that in your story. Actually, if they identify with the person at the beginning, have the person just sit up straight. Actually, no, I don't know if that would make sense. Put in the instructions. Put in the instructions.
Oh, you know what? That would be a fun example to play around with, and
you could play, and that's it. Play around with it. Make it funny, and don't be. You're just kind of, because it is powerful, right? For people to pay attention, they actually, it's not about their eyeballs, it's their body.
Yeah.
And Tony Robbins actually, he understands that 1,000,000,000%. It's their body.
Yeah, because what he always says this, your physiology affects your emotion, right? Their physical state, how you've, it's like try and be angry while lying down. Not possible, right? Very hard to do.
Yeah.
So the same thing. So try and be engaged and on while slouching and feeling like, right. So, and I always say this even, I had this one presentation where I actually told people, hey, why don't you put a pencil in your mouth? Right?
Yeah.
And then try and not be happy at that moment, right? It happens. It's one influences the other. So that's actually really cool. That's a cool hack. I wonder, I'm going to start using that, Ryan. Thanks a lot.
Conflict, I think. Do we have to talk about conflict?
Yes, we do. And the one thing that I think about, because I remember running workshops where people, this always comes up in scenarios, and this is the challenge. When you're designing a scenario and you're thinking of all the options that somebody would make, when let's say there's a problem and all of a sudden they have to make a decision. And one of the ways that I've hacked how do you choose what those decisions are going to be that this person is going to be presented with, when you're interviewing the top performer, those decisions become very clear. There's decisions that regular people make, and there's a different decision that, let's say, the top performer would make. Mm-hmm. However, one of the things that has, even when I talk about things like that, there's always that like one or two people in the crowd that are like, well, yeah, but what if my learner would never make that decision? And what I think, and that used to kind of stump me, and I'm like, well, they could email you. But then now I think about the fact that if you have a story and you're telling the story through that person's eyes, these are their decisions. You're not trying to come up with infinite decisions or think, nobody would think that from or
well,
right?
Yeah, that's a great point, because we don't movies are just full of decisions, right? That the main character has to take. There's none of us, while we're watching a movie, is like, well, I wouldn't have made that decision.
Well, I think we do that. But But we do that, but we know that that's their decisions that they're making. So we're modeling that through their eyes. Through their eyes. But then also, like, now we're going to get into like the design of e-learning, that you could still move the story forward and take them on that emotional transformation while having them make the decisions. So you could have the learner make the decisions and still move the story in a linear fashion. Yes, because we're going to get to a conclusion in the movie, right?
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Even, and in a scenario, we are as well. Mm-hmm. Okay.
But back to the idea of the conflict. The reason you have conflict, and this is what I learned from Michael Haig, is the character and the desire isn't what creates the emotion. It's the conflict. And when we say emotion, it's like, it's your emotions. Like, our human emotions come from conflict. They come from obstacles. So... Okay,
I want you to dig in more into this idea of what an actual conflict is, because when I think of like a compliance thing where it's like Judy has to remember to shred the paper because the stuff, if this information gets out, she works at a banking institution, if this information gets out, somebody could use this information to maybe blackmail her. There's a phishing thing and they could use her accounts. So where's the conflict? Is it the fact that she's trying to, like, the conflict is, don't do this because you'll get fired?
Well, right now you'd have to start with the end goal in mind. Who's the character?
Let's say it's Judy.
Judy. Well, who's Judy becoming? Like, the first thing that would come to mind is like, what's the end goal, and what's kind of like this the journey, like the end.
Yes.
Right? What's that desire, right?
Yeah. So,
because again, what you're talking about now is a very concrete training, like a concrete action, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the concrete actions, and I think this is one of the problems with e-learning and what we're doing, because we're not treating the medium for what we could actually treat, like a different purpose of e-learning. Again, I want you to think about a different purpose of e-learning, because we're getting into the concrete actions. Well, that's just training on information. Don't do this.
Yes.
You're like,
totally.
Okay. Well, does that change who Judy is?
Well,
because
no.
You want Judy to become something, right?
Well, it's true. I want
the A player of whatever this is. Who is that?
True. And one of the things I think about is that, there's a lot of people who would comply with that request, saying,
and they're disengaged at their work,
exactly.
And they're not happy.
So one of the things I'm thinking about is the kind of training I want to put together always is the kind where not only does Judy comply, but when Judy sees something else that is out of that falls, how would I say this? If there's something else that I haven't covered, without me having to tell Judy becomes the kind of person who recognizes those pieces and takes pride in in doing.
So exactly.
Right?
So now what you're saying, now you're like, okay, let's make a story about that. Because like I said, it's about a different purpose of e-learning. Mm-hmm. Because what you said is like Judy's becoming this person, an ideal. And I'm not talking about the A player anymore. I'm just talking about an ideal I don't even want to say worker. An ideal person that is just
high integrity.
High integrity, just a great person to work with, whether it's just, so
They're
you
conscientious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can create stories through e-learning that actually are filling that gap. And you can fill the gap of making the Judys and the learners to actually recognize on an emotional level that this is something to aspire to. Mm-hmm. And again, we have to unpack that and go, okay, we have to actually go, what's the desire that actually would want them to make that transformation, right? Mm-hmm. We have to really think about that, right? We actually have to go, okay, what is this? And again, I think we talked about this earlier, it could be they're in a rut. And that's always a good place. That's where Pixar always starts, right?
In a rut, yeah.
Pixar always starts with their life is mundane, which is easy to think about. It's like, what makes your life mundane? It's,
repetition.
Paying bills all the time. It's just like...
I think a lot of it is also just, not living to your full potential or not being recognized or wanting that recognition, whether that is,
now,
status.
I want to bring up something that I think is insanely cool, and it's something I've been thinking about.
I'm always game for insanely cool, yeah.
E-learning isn't about training people on the new training program or the new training campaign. It's not about giving them the information that's in the training program or the training program. So let's just say you have a new leadership framework, right? Say your company is now launching a new leadership framework.
What does that mean?
Just a new way of conducting yourself as a leader,
okay,
right?
Cool, all right.
And whatever all those things are.
Quite a bit, I'm hearing.
So you have a new training program. It's a leadership framework, and it has all these new leadership techniques and practices that actually leaders can or people can aspire to be, right?
To be better leaders.
Exactly.
Okay. Right. Which is like, as far as I'm concerned, this is like probably over the past 2-3 years, leadership has just overtaken where the initiatives as far as learning and training go. So this is actually a really, really great topic because I think a lot of people would be interested in this.
So you have the campaign. It's a leadership framework that you want to launch to your company. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, what can you use e-learning as? Well, e-learning can be the story. It's not okay. You layer storytelling on top of the e-learning so that you can emotionally get people involved and sell them on that training program. Mm-hmm. So they're emotionally sold on actually following through and being interested in this program. Mm-hmm. You're not using e-learning actually to teach the leadership. You're not using e-learning to actually just repurpose the content and information and let's dump it on the internet in a PowerPoint slide. No, it's not the purpose anymore. The purpose is to take them through a journey from where they are that they could identify with, and this is now we're getting into a bit deeper into storytelling. So say they're in a rut, right? Mm-hmm. And you could do that through storytelling. Stories do that all the time. It's just tell people, okay, life is pretty mundane. You're bored in a certain area, right?
Yeah.
But you would aspire to something. You aspire to something bigger than you are right now. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, the point of e-learning is there's that point where they're in a rut and something happens. Now, the answer is the new training program. Something happens in their life or something happens in the story that the answer is the new training program, the leadership framework. So here I'll just unpack this a bit. So you have an e-learning course. You have a story of somebody who's just not reaching their full potential. They're in a rut. They're living a bit of a mundane. Past couple months have been pretty mundane, right? Mm-hmm. Or they're getting feedback. What is it? Those 360 feedbacks from their employees.
Yeah, and they're just like they think they're doing great.
Yeah,
but it's not coming back awesome.
Okay, yeah. So we have that at the very beginning.
Okay.
They realize, okay, they're not doing as great as they should be.
Yeah.
Okay. Then kind of like after 10% into or 20% into the e-learning course, they bump into a coworker who's crushing it, who's all of a sudden getting some praise or whatever, or maybe not praise, something a bit more contextual within the company. They just won an award or got some they won the vacation, right? Whether it's or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? And then they're a good friend. They come over and they said, yeah, I did this. I just started following the leadership framework. I followed the new training program, right?
Yeah.
Now that's where our hero of the story starts going, wait a minute, the answer is following the new training program. And then they're going to follow the training program. Like, we are going to make them follow the training program in this e-learning story. And they're going to go through scenarios and situations, conflicts, because it's not easy. It's not simple as just say, here's the training, now life is smooth, right? It never happens like that, because people need to practice, need to actually
learn from mistakes.
Now start being in situations where, okay,
they can contextualize, that framework, right? Because it's different saying, oh, if the answer to your problem, you could be me. Here it is. Here's the exactly. It doesn't work, right? Like, you still have to do the due diligence of now saying, in this situation, this is the kind of, pull this out of the framework. This will help you. So that's okay. So it's kind of cool, because I see us, our domains overlap, where you have, like, I come at it from the perspective of what are those situations where you're going to have to make a decision and learn from that consequence and maybe get some feedback. The feedback could be simply from the consequence. And then you're saying that the only way to get them primed and ready for that to be sold.
Yes.
I think that's genius.
And also,
sold.
So basically, I'm selling them. I'm
selling them before they get to experience. You're pre-selling it.
Yeah, and basically getting them into state. So I've now gotten them into state using emotion.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to take them once their coworker said, "Hey, I'm following the leadership framework. You should follow in this. This is in the story.
Yeah.
You should follow it too." Now this is where Anna comes in, and she has these scenarios and takes them through the journey of using the leadership framework, where they start seeing that once it's applied, it does solve their problem. Then at the end, state control again, we have them become this new hero, just like they do in movies. Again, why you have an emotional reaction at the end of certain movies when the hero wins, when Rocky actually, survives. We'll just talk about Rocky 1, when he I think he just made it to the end. That was the huge win, right? And you have this emotional connection. So you want to take them on this journey here, where at the very end they realize, oh wait, I just followed the leadership framework, or I followed this new training campaign, and I did get what I wanted at the end. I did get my desire, But here's now we're going to get into a bit deeper of storytelling. It's not about achieving something. It's not the concrete achievement.
It's not?
It's the deeper transformation. They've become something that is not, it's not the tangible, right? Because you could have, like, say it's an award, like a concrete award that you get, a vacation. It's not getting the vacation, like winning the corporate vacation or whatever it is, right? It's actually becoming. And that's where you can now use storytelling at the very end, that your character, who they're identifying with, becomes something, their full potential. Not their full potential, but bigger than they were before at the very beginning.
So would you say that when you're setting up the story, that initial certificate or achievement, that's more like kind of like to rope them in a little bit? That's the kind of like the carrot? But it's something else that makes them continue. Like, to me, this almost is...
Well, that's great. You could say a certificate, because e-learning is all about certificates, right?
Well, for some people,
for a lot of people, no, not for people receiving it, it's for people who are developing the training. It's like they feel that tangible certificate is something that... that's it. That's done. Give them that piece of paper and they put it up on the wall, and you're like, well, I'm saying, okay, that's good. But I'm saying in the story of the e-learn, the story that you want to tell them is that certificate represents something deeper. And you have to make that, you have to explain, tell that to them and make them feel that actually has some deeper meaning. And we see that in movies all the time. At the end, it's not always about achieving a certain goal.
Yeah.
It's about who that person becomes at the end.
So, and I talked about this in a different podcast. I talked about the fact that all you have time to do in that 15 minutes is to inspire somebody to, after they finish, to feel like they can go on and continue learning. Like they're pumped enough to say, that could be me. And then they go off and actually learn or try or whatever. Yeah. So it's like you're not actually going, skill sets, here you go, 15 minutes, you're a maestro.
Yeah, exactly.
Look, this is some opportunity for you to kind of experience what it's like living in this world, right? Mm-hmm. Now, do you want it? And then go and here's some.
There you go. Right? And that's where, like, I think there's just not. I'll just say it's not the wrong conversation that's happening in the e-learning world. It's just that nobody's really having a different conversation about what people become through e-learning. Because we always talk about what do they need to do? What do they need to do in the e-learning? Ask them what they need to do.
I've fallen into that.
Yeah, and you're like, well, how about what do they need to be? Who do they need to become? And that's where you, well, how do you do that? Well, through storytelling.
Cool.
Right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, and we've talked about this, is that, what is it, the 70-20-10, right? And again, that's
okay, that's another podcast.
I know, but my point that I'll just say quickly about that is, it's just people are having not the wrong conversation, but there's a different conversation that can happen with that 10%, right? And how it's used.
Yeah.
Because in that 70%.
Okay, just let me put the context around. We're talking about the basically the model that the 70-20-10 model, where 10%, basically it's been broken down that people, when they learn at work, 10% of it happens through direct instructions, which is, at this point, we're talking about e-learning. 20% happens through that self-study, self-work, and then 70 are peer or something. No, 20% is the
mentoring, I think.
Actually, is it mentoring?
I don't know.
This basically what they're saying is that the bulk of your learning, the 70% that happens, is the environmental stuff that,
on the job,
what you learn on the job.
Yeah.
And the kind of the skew that we had, I think the skew that's been happening is that people think that because the 10% is so small,
it's so bad too. People
it's so
say
bad that it's okay to write it off and not realize that piece can be so very powerful in impacting the rest of all those experiences, which is that 90%. Mm-hmm. That this 10% is actually to be even more. It's because it's so small. It needs to be even better.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it can have such a huge impact. Because it is one-on-one. You're one-on-one with the learner, and you can totally, like, even through the things you talked about, it affect that state. But I think that's another conversation. So
yeah, I just like it's about, like, again, turning your mindset to, okay, that 10%. It's not about the size. Size doesn't matter.
Uh-oh, here's a joke.
No, I know. So no, I'm just saying about it's how impactful.
Yes.
That 10% can be.
Yes.
Like, think about a trip to Disney World, right?
Yes.
That you take your family on. Well, and it's, say, a 3-day vacation in Disney World that you take your kids on. Okay, that's only for 3 days out of 365 days of it a year.
Out of your lifetime.
What is that? That's 0.00 whatever.
Yeah.
1%. Okay?
Yeah.
If we're just going to still play this game of percentage, but what's the impact of that family trip?
By the way, you don't have any shares in
no. No,
I wish.
Not at all. No.
But you're right. It's a blip in time.
It's a blip in time.
It's a blip, but it is such a huge blip. Like, people talk about their Disney. Like, you went as a kid, right? You remember.
Oh yeah, I think you all awesome. When you're the kid, you will always remember that vacation.
That was like the pinnacle of awesome, right? And so small in the grand scheme of your life.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Again, we're going back to what I'm trying to say with e-learning is have that awareness of what you can actually do with e-learning.
Yeah,
because we're using it in just.
I think you know what it is about aspiration. Have that aspiration that I'm going to be like. I'm going to try and make this e-learning the Disney World trip.
Exactly.
For my learners.
Okay, and that's a good point, because now you're thinking about, when you say Disney World, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about people and their emotions.
Yes.
And how they feel.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks Disney, it's a feeling, right?
Yeah.
You're not thinking about, like, them going up on a PowerPoint slide telling you about how to enjoy life or something like that. They just make you actually enjoy life.
Do I get to hug the princess?
Yeah. So
Cool. All right.
I think we're good.
Not to cut you off there, yes, but I think that, so I have, I feel like if I ask you right now, what would be some tips that would be another conversation, but I want people to learn more about your work, and I want them to know where to go so that they can get more of this detail and some strategies on how to use this in their work. Because I know you say it's easy, but I think most of us don't think so. So I'd love for them to actually learn more about how you can incorporate story into e-learning. So where can people go to find you?
Well, I'm going to be redoing my website, but you could still, of course, like anyone. But yeah, go to eLearnerEngage.com. That's obviously where I do my consulting. And if you want to actually ask me some questions about storytelling and e-learning and how you can apply it to your projects, and if you have any training programs right now or any future training programs where you're like, okay, what Ryan talked about is interesting and maybe there's something there, you can email me at ryan@elearnerengage.com. I'll answer some questions. And yeah, I love having this conversation about how to make e-learning and how people interact online a bit more human, a bit more inspiring, and about helping people grow. So
Cool.
If you're into that, yeah, send me an email, ryan@elearnerengage.com.
Thank you. Now, also, for those of you listening, if you found this interesting or you want me to do another interview with Ryan, then there's lots of opportunities for you.
No, I'm done. I have no more information.
That's it. We've tapped your story resources. That's cool. So anyways, either comment or send an email, or if you think this is good stuff, then subscribe, because I think more will be coming. This kind of stuff, provocative, I hope. And I will talk to you next time, my friends. Take care.
This is the eLearning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.